As of February 14, 2025, Kenya's domestic debt has exceeded 6 trillion Kenyan shillings, primarily due to the increase in Treasury bonds and bills. Treasury bonds are the largest component, accounting for approximately 81.99% of total securities, totaling 4.936 trillion Kenyan shillings. To fund the 2025/2026 fiscal year budget, the National Treasury plans to borrow 759.5 billion Kenyan shillings. This borrowing strategy includes 545.8 billion Kenyan shillings from domestic sources and 213.7 billion Kenyan shillings from external loans. The Finance Ministry projects the budget deficit to narrow to 4.3% of GDP in the 2025/2026 fiscal year, down from 4.9% in 2024/2025. Overall government spending is expected to rise to 4.34 trillion Kenyan shillings in 2025/2026, up from 3.95 trillion Kenyan shillings in the current year ending in June. The 2025/2026 deficit will be financed through net external financing of 146.8 billion Kenyan shillings and net domestic financing of 684.2 billion Kenyan shillings. In a move to manage its debt profile, Kenya recently issued a $1.5 billion Eurobond. The proceeds from this issuance are intended to rearrange state debt by swapping out shorter-dated securities and repaying syndicated loans. Additionally, the government has secured a $1.5 billion loan from the United Arab Emirates, with plans to delay its drawdown to align with budgetary requirements. Moody's Investors Service has revised Kenya's credit outlook from negative to positive, citing potential easing in liquidity risks and improving debt affordability. This revision reflects optimism about Kenya's fiscal consolidation efforts and the possibility of accessing more external funding options. Despite these developments, Kenya faces significant debt obligations, including a requirement to pay 161 billion Kenyan shillings by October 2025, indicating ongoing fiscal challenges. Stay with us to the end for a detailed explanation through an African folktale. Once upon a time, deep in the heart of Africa, there was a village named Kwetu. It was a land of abundance, where the people worked hard, farming their lands and raising livestock. The village flourished because everyone played a role in its economy. Some grew crops, others herded cattle, while traders exchanged goods with nearby settlements. Life in Kwetu was peaceful, and the villagers were proud of their self-sufficiency. One year, the skies turned against them. The rains, which had always nourished their fields, failed to arrive. The rivers dried up, the crops withered, and the livestock grew thin. By the time harvest season arrived, the granaries were nearly empty. Hunger and uncertainty spread across the village like wildfire. The village elders quickly called a meeting at the big baobab tree, the gathering place for important decisions. The air was heavy with worry as everyone awaited a solution. Elder Juma, the oldest and most respected man in the village, cleared his throat. For generations, we have depended on the land and the skies. But today, nature has turned its back on us. We must look beyond our borders for help. The villagers murmured in agreement. They had heard of nearby villages that had received enough rainfall and still had surplus food. The council decided to send envoys to those communities, asking for aid. The envoys traveled far and wide, visiting neighboring villages that had been blessed with better conditions. Fortunately, the neighboring communities were kind. They shared their surplus grains, and soon, Kwetu's people had enough to survive the season. There was relief, but the problem was not truly solved. One evening, as the villagers gathered around the fire, Elder Amina, one of the wisest women in Kwetu, raised a concern. We are grateful to our neighbors, but what if next time, they also face hardship? What if they are unable to help us? We cannot always rely on outsiders to rescue us. We must find a way to stand on our own feet. The villagers nodded, realizing the truth in her words. There had to be a better way to prepare for tough times. As they pondered the matter, young Kofi, a forward-thinking farmer, spoke up. What if we create our own food reserve? Each year, during harvest, we contribute a portion of our grains to a communal granary. Then, in times of need, we can take from it instead of borrowing from others. The villagers were intrigued. a communal granary. It was a bold idea. Elder Juma stroked his beard. Kofi speaks wisely. But how can we ensure everyone contributes fairly? Kofi thought for a moment. Each household should set aside a small percentage of their harvest, nothing too much, just enough so that it does not burden them. If everyone contributes, the storage will grow. And in times of hardship, we can distribute the grains to those in need. The villagers debated for a while, but in the end, they agreed. That very season, they built a massive granary in the heart of Kwetu. Every household pledged to contribute a portion of their harvest. The village elders were put in charge of maintaining it, ensuring fairness in collection and distribution. At first, the villagers found it difficult to give up even a small portion of their grains. But as the seasons passed, the granary filled, and their trust in the system grew. Years later, disaster struck again. Another drought swept through the land, and the crops failed once more. This time, however, Kwetu was prepared. The elders gathered the villagers and opened the communal granary. The grains were distributed, and no one went hungry. While neighboring villages struggled, Kwetu thrived. They no longer had to beg for help. They had secured their future through collective effort. The success of Kwetu's granary did not go unnoticed. Traders from other villages came to Kwetu, offering to buy grain during difficult times. The village leaders, seeing an opportunity, decided to trade a small portion of their surplus and reinvest in better farming tools and techniques. Over time, the village became stronger and wealthier, all because they had learned to rely on their own resources before seeking external help. This story of Kwetu teaches an important lesson about domestic funding. Just as Kwetu chose to build a reserve to sustain itself rather than always borrowing, a country like Kenya must prioritize internal sources of funding before looking for external loans. The idea of setting aside resources for difficult times is similar to Kenya raising money from within its own economy through domestic borrowing, like Treasury bonds and bills, rather than depending too much on foreign debt. By strengthening its local economy, just like Kwetu strengthened its granary, Kenya can reduce its dependence on external loans and ensure it has the financial stability to support its future.